Hello, hello. How is everyone this afternoon? Good? Raise your hand if you're asleep. Okay, great.
It's a lot more hands than I would have thought.
I know. Luckily, we're asleep too.
Hoped.
Who's gone up to the community lounge and gotten their fantastic glasses? Aren't these awesome? So I was joking with Ed earlier that I should be presenting like this, but I don't think I will. So my name is Łukasz Pawłowski, and this is?
Josh Kaplan.
Hey, so we're on the Power BI team. We are going to talk to you about Power BI for developers. And so we're going to do a breakneck, fast-paced slides, demos, and all of it all together. We only have like 50 minutes. So if you're sitting at the back, you might want to move forward, and then so you can see the screen. And just let us run through, and we'll take questions probably at the end, just because the session's quite short. Okay? Silent cell phones. So I like to start these sessions just by talking about the changing world of data, which is, right, when we think about building applications or portals, which is predominantly the way we use BI systems, it used to be that you'd have a few constrained data sources. You could build an application or portal that met the needs of the particular users you were building for. And one of the big things that's happened over the last few years is that there's a whole bunch more data sources. In Power BI, if you've gone to any of the sessions, you will have seen content packs and all of our SaaS connectivity. And users are empowered increasingly to go and take data from any of the different sources, right, and mash them up and present them. And so as an application developer, it's actually hard for us now, right? We have to go and figure out a way to bring all of that data along with our application-centric data and provide it to our end users. And Power BI is a service that allows you to do that very, very easily for all of the sources. And so what we're going to cover in this session today is, first off, how can you take your application's data and bring it into Power BI in various ways? But also, we're going to start showing you some capabilities for taking the things that you see in Power BI and bring them into your own applications. Okay? So those are the two major things. Like if you think of everything that we're going to show you how to call our APIs, how to embed content from a user's Power BI account into an application. We're going to show you even things like custom visuals. It's really about this picture. Okay? So when we talk about developer scenarios, we really talk about two things. The first one is integration. The second one is extending. So when you integrate with Power BI, what you're doing is you're enabling your users to access your data from within the Power BI experience. Think content packs. Or you can take and integrate Power BI reports or tiles into your applications. So it's about how can you leverage the capabilities so that users, your application users, who are also Power BI users, can leverage both together. And then extending, what that's all about is sometimes the things that we have built into Power BI are not quite the way that you need them, right? Your users have a specific way to visualize data that's really important, drives fast decision making, accurate decision making. Well, we provide some hooks in places where you can go extend what we do to achieve more of the things that you need to go ahead and do. So when we look at Power BI, you may have seen this slide. It might be a little small if you're all the way at the back. But Power BI is an ecosystem for building data experiences, if you would, right? A report is really a data experience. It provides the ability to connect to any kind of data source, whether it's small little CSV files to the largest big data systems. And the thing that what we're trying to do with our developer story, and you see us moving through incrementally towards this aim, is to expose all that stuff that you see end users partying on inside the Power BI SaaS service, right? So that developers can plug into those things and leverage those things. The assets that are being built by end users, being built by IT professionals, and being built by application authors. And we're going to talk here about a number of things like REST APIs and some of the first things that we have around embedding reports and tiles. And we're also going to talk about some of the extension pieces that we have. So with that, I'm going to transition over to Josh, who's going to talk about Power BI REST APIs.
Thanks. So how many people have actually tried the Power BI REST API so far? Yeah, actually a good number. So this being Power BI, we have about 3 main objects at the top of Power BI: reports, data sets, dashboards. And it is the goal of the REST API to one day let you automate all the functionality, all the different actions that you can do through the UI, but through the API. So we've gotten started with that, and we've structured the API around these main objects. and some of the additional things that I'll show you in a moment. So first thing to know is, how do I actually get to the API? Well, there's two ways to address the API. Really one way to address the API, sorry. It's api.powerbi.com, and then we do a version. There's two versions right now. We have a beta version, and beta is whenever we have new functionality, we're going to roll it out to beta, get feedback on it, basically test in production, get feedback from you guys, what you think about it, what we could do differently. And then once that's gone through a cycle and we've been able to bake it, we'll move it into one of the numbered versions. In this case, we have the V1 version, and that's where the API contracts will be locked and stable, and it's safe to for you to confidently put it in your application, not worry about contract changes. And then the last part of the URL is the tenant. So tenant is the company or the organization that the user is in. So I work at Microsoft, I'm in the Microsoft tenant. If it was Contoso, I would work at Contoso tenant. And typically, if you're building applications for users, you may not know everything about the user, where they work, what they're in. So you can actually just specify my.org, which tells us to look at who is the user that's signed in, figure out what tenant they're on, and we'll actually plop in the right tenant name into this URL for you automatically just by specifying my.org. And we use that to route the request to the proper location in the world based on where that user's tenant is hosted. One other thing to think about when actually using the APIs is there are two types of workspaces in Power BI currently. When you log into Power BI, you see your reports, your data sets, your dashboards. We also have this concept of groups workspaces, and if you navigate to a group, you see the groups reports, data sets, and dashboards. So same thing with the API. If I want to access a data set in my workspace, all I do is api.powerbi.com/the version/my.org/datasets. If I want to access data sets for a group, then the URL is slightly different. I put the group ID in here and the groups collection in here. And then anything that comes after this slash here in the resource URL will be in the group's context, not the user's context. So another thing to think about too when looking at the APIs, anything that has an S on it is generally a collection of objects. So this is a collection of the groups that the signed in user is a member of. And anything with a collection, if you do a get on top of it, use the HTTP verb get, it'll return to you the items that are in that collection. So if I call get on top of groups, it'll return to me all the groups that the signed in user is a member of, the group name and the group ID. That way I can have a picker for the user in my UI that says, okay, which group do you want to access? I can populate it by making it that REST call. And then when they select the group they want, I can put it in the URL here, and then all further calls will be in the context of that group. So some of the APIs we have available today, I mentioned Datasets API. So you access that by after the version, you put /datasets. Again, anything that has an S on the end is a collection. You do a get on the collection. It'll list out all the data sets that signed in user has. Now, if you do a post on a collection, it actually adds a new item to that collection. So if I do a post on data sets, I can actually create a brand new data set for the user programmatically. I can navigate to a specific data set, and I can navigate to the collections of the data set, or sorry, the table of that data set. Again, table, collection, so I can get a list of all the tables that are in a data set. And an interesting thing, if I want to change a table, I can actually do a put on that specific table, and I can supply a new schema for that table. So say I want to add a column or remove a column. I can navigate to that table in my URL here, and I can call put, give it a new schema, and those schema changes will be applied to that table. And next time I look at the table, I'll see the new columns or the removed columns. Finally, on table, you have rows. So if you do just like with data sets, when I do a post to data sets, I create a new data set. When I do a post to rows, I actually add new rows to the data set. So I can actually send rows of data through the API to Power BI using that post on rows. And any reports or dashboards that are connected to that data set will automatically update. I'll show you this in a moment. Finally, I can call delete on rows, and that will do what you'd expect, delete out, remove all the rows that are in that table in that data set. No update, just delete and insert. So we also have an API called the import API. And if you've ever gone to Power BI, clicked on get data and said from file, and given it an Excel file or a Power BI desktop file, then you see a new report and a new data set pop up in your UI. This API automates that flow. So you can actually automate the upload of a PBIX file or an Excel file from OneDrive Pro right now, and pretty soon an Excel file locally as well. Dashboard API, you can list out all the dashboards for a user. You can list out all the tiles that are on that dashboard. The main reason you'd want to use this one right now is if you plan to embed any of those tiles into your application, which we'll show some examples of in a moment. And you can do the same with reports. I can list out all the reports for the signed-in user or the user's group, depending on which context I'm in. So let's actually look at our API console. One of the goals we had when we first started putting together this dev story was that we wanted it to be really easy for people to get started. If you haven't written a lot of code before, we wanted you to be able to try the APIs without having to write a line of code. So that's where this API console comes in. I forgot your trick. There we go. So to find the API console or to find anything about developing for Power BI, you go to dev.powerbi.com. Here you'll find documentation, you'll find our blog, you'll find sample code, and you'll find our API console. So API console you can find under under REST APIs. Try the API or get started now. And the API console is kind of interesting. It has some documentation, but in line it also shows you the examples of the calls. So let's say I want to look at data sets and I want to list all the data sets. It gives me the example of that call, and the one I showed you in the slide is just a get on data sets. But I can actually try it out here. When I say try, it'll tell me authentication is needed. I'll sign in with my Power BI login. I'll accept certain permissions. And now I can actually try the call out itself. So I'll say call. Let's go side by side while this is running. So here's the request it made, and then here's the response. And the body of the response is just the same list of data sets that I have in my UI here. The data set name, data set ID. Now that's listing data sets, but I can also go ahead and create a new data set. Instead of doing post, I just gave it away. Instead of doing get, I do a post. Same endpoint, /data sets, but it's a post instead of a get. And in the body of that post, I put in the schema of the data set I want to create. So I want to create a data set called sales marketing. It has a collection of tables. In this case, one table called product, which has a collection of columns, 5 columns, product ID, category, and then all the data types for those columns. That's the schema of the data set. So you can call this again, and I can go back side by side. And you see sales dashboard, sales marketing just popped up there without me having to refresh the page or anything. So that API call went ahead and generated that data set. I can click on it. There's one table called product, 5 columns. No data in there yet, so we can change that. When I made this call to create the data set, the response is a location of where that data set was created. So basically the URL to that data set, and also the ID of the data set. So I can copy that ID out. And I'm going to navigate all the way down to tables and then rows of a table. So you insert rows into a table that's inside of a data set. So let's say I add rows to a table and data set. It'll give me an example of that call. And I'll put in the data set ID. And when I do that, you'll see the URL change to include that data set ID. So it's data set ID / table. So I need to put in the specific name of the table so I can navigate to it. It was product. And this is going to be a post call. And in the body, we have a collection of rows. I'm sending one row here, but I could send up to 10,000 if I wanted to in a single request. So it's one row, and it's column name and value. So I can go ahead and say call. And if the row is inserted, I get 200 OK. And we can go back, and we can click on sales marketing. And now let's say I want to create a visual. Let's create a pie chart. Let's see the number of products by category. So I'll create a pie chart. And let's drop category on here, and let's do count of category. So I get a blue dot. I get a blue dot because there's one row in there. But it's an accurate blue dot, as in I have one product in one category. So I can save this blue dot. And I can pin this blue dot, just like I would any other visual. And now I have a blue dot on a dashboard. To make it a little less of a blue dot, I can come back here and just add some more rows. Instead of component, let's change the category. We'll call it cars. Call. And when I do that, anytime a new record gets inserted into a table, you'll see the visuals will update automatically. And I'll insert another row. You'll see it go again. So I can send this data as frequently as once per second. So meaning once per second, you can have the dashboard updating. So you can get to near real time by just sending data frequently. Now, sending data frequently will give you a near real-time dashboard, but you can also use this as a way to just get data into a table. So you can just send a blob of data up to a data set and do it on whatever cycle it needs to go. So if you have an application now that, let's say, has an output to Excel or output to CSV, using this API, you could easily add an output to Power BI option into your application. In order to do that, you're going to start to need to write some code. So to help you get started, you can try the things out here, but then you can come down here and you'll see the raw request you made with REST. We can also click on Code Example and select from a bunch of different languages. Let's pick Node this time. And it'll give you the example of the call you just made that you can go and copy and paste, put into your application. Got to throw an authentication header on there, but that'll basically get you started. So that's the API console. Let's go back to the deck for a moment. So a couple new APIs that will be, well, I'll announce now. I'll have the documentation up for that early next week. But these are our connection and gateway APIs. So I talked about before we can import a desktop file. And let's say I imported a desktop file that's using direct query. Well, what happens if you import a file that uses direct query and then you go to use it in Power BI itself? Prompts you for credentials. So with these APIs, you can actually go ahead and, as part of that uploading process, you can actually go and set the credentials so when the user comes in, the file just works for them. They can go and interact with it. You can also change the data source on there. So let's say you develop the report against a development database, and then you have a production database up in the somewhere else. When you actually upload the file, you can change the the data source to point to that production database from the development, and then set the credentials for that. So these APIs will allow for that, and I'll do a quick demo of it. So I have this file here. It's using direct query. So every time I click on something here, it's actually firing a query off to a SQL Azure database in the cloud. And I built this against my development database. I have a different one I use for production. So I want to be able to put this up into the service. And I want to provision it for maybe a bunch of users, and I want to have it work for each one of them when it actually gets up there. So I'm going to run this sample, and then I'll walk through the steps. Just like any application, it'll ask you to log in. And east, west, east. Consent to some permissions, meaning that this app can do these things on my behalf. This app can upload a file for me. It can change connection strings. It can do all those things on my behalf. I say OK. So first thing it's going to do is call the import API. It's going to pass in the bytes for that file. And the import API itself is an asynchronous call because files can be big. So you'll notice here, after the import happens, we poll for the completion. So I make a call. When you put the file up there, you're going to get an import ID back. And then you can poll for completion of that import by just doing a get on that import ID, which you see. I don't know why I can't show my cursor. Which you see right here. And then you'll see the response back from that is that the state is still publishing. Let me actually, never mind. So the state is actually still publishing. That sort of worked. So because of that, I'll go and I'll poll again. And then this time it'll tell me that the import is complete. So it succeeded. Import state succeeded. And then it'll return to me the dataset ID that was created, the ID for the report that was created. Now I can use that dataset ID to go ahead and change the connection string. So on that dataset, I will go and I'll call set all connections. And I will pass into it a new connection string. So you'll see here a connection string. I'm there. And on that connection string, I'll have a SQL connection string. Source database is my Azure SQL database. The initial catalog is, in this case, sample2. And that will return an OK once it's done. So now I have my file pointing to a different database, but still, I have to set credentials on it or no one will be able to use it. So I'll make another call to set credentials. And if you've refreshed files or configured this manually in Power BI before, you've noticed we have these things called gateways. A gateway is what actually connects between Power BI and the data source itself. And that's where your credentials get stored, and that's where you configure these options. So you can have multiple gateways. You can have, we call our cloud gateway, which is everything that runs in the cloud, like things that run to SQL Azure. Or you can install the personal gateway or your enterprise gateway. So you need to figure out what what gateway this data set was actually bound to. So you can make this call to get bound gateway data sources. And that will return to you the data source ID and the gateway ID for the data set that data set happens to be bound to. And the last thing you do is, now that you have the gateway and the data source of that gateway, you just call this last line here, which is a patch on the gateway data source. So I put in that gateway ID, the data source ID, and then patch. And in the body, I have the credential type, which is basic. And for basic, you supply a username and really secure password here. And that's all you have to do. So now if I go back to the service, I have a new report called Sales Report. I click on it. It loads. And the data is live. And if you noticed before, my data is actually different. In my production database, for some reason, I decided to put my name on every company. So that is the import API with the new gateway and credential APIs. So when creating an app, there's a couple steps you go through. You notice when I started each application, there was this sign-in screen that pops up, and then a permissions consent dialog. Well, that all gets set up when you first registered your application. It had my app's name on it. It said who created the app, and it said what permissions is the app asking the user to consent to. You set all that up when you register the application. Once you've registered the application, you get the IDs necessary to actually go ahead and call our APIs. You'll get a client ID, and in some cases a client secret that you can use to actually call our APIs and trigger that login flow. Once you've done that, you can call the APIs, you can build your app, and then you can distribute the app to as many users as you want, and it can all work against their Power BI accounts. So let's look at app registration for a moment. So I want to register an app. Where do I go? It's always dev.powerbi.com. And you'll see a couple options here for register your app. There's two types of apps you can make. One's a client app, and this is like, let's say I'm writing a console application, and it's going to run locally on someone's machine. Then I would make it a client app. Or let's say I'm making a more modern application like a web server or a mobile app where some part of it's running on a server somewhere, or some part of it might be running in the cloud. That's when you use the web app option. So I'm going to go ahead and say web app, register my app. This takes you to our app registration page. Now, all you need to do to register an app is have a Power BI account. So just sign in with your Power BI account. Now you just name your app. This is the app. This is the display name that anyone who uses your application will see. We already picked the type of app. Now it's a web app. So when you do a web app, the users are going to sign in to your application using their Power BI accounts. And they don't sign in to your application. They sign into Power BI. And they sign into Power BI through Azure Active Directory. Now, when that dialog popped up in a couple of the other demos, that was a page from Azure Active Directory. The user types in their username and password there. The app itself never sees that, because that web page is directly on Azure AD. Now, because that page is on Azure AD, and the next steps of that flow are in Azure AD, they have to somehow get that information back to you, basically get that access token back to you so you can go make the API calls. They do that by this redirect URL. So this is just a URL in your app that's listening for the response for the completion of that login flow to say, to receive the login, or to receive the access token to make the API calls. So it just has to be a valid URL that your app is actually listening on. So if you're developing, usually it's on your local machine, something like that. Homepage URL, this is just a little bit of metadata, your sign-in page or your informational page for your app. This way, if the user sees it in their app collection inside Azure AD, and they click on the app, you can take them to a page where they can get more information about it. And the last step is the permissions. So when I wanted to push rows to a data set, I basically needed read-write all data sets. That means my app can write to the data sets of the user and can view the data sets that they have available there. If I want to, say, embed a report or a tile, let's say I want to embed a report, I just need read all reports. Similar, if I want to embed a tile, I would need read all dashboards. If I want to access the user's groups, I would need read all groups. And if you hover over here, this is, you'll see the text of what each of these does. It's best practice to only take the permissions you need. It's more likely that the actual user using your application will agree to give you those permissions if you only take the ones you need. And finally, just click register, and you'll get back your client ID, your client secret, which you can use to call the API. If you download our web sample, you run through these steps, you just copy and paste that right into our web sample, and hit F5, and you'll have a fully functioning web app running against Power BI. So that is the app registration. So recap a little bit. Register your app with Azure AD. AD is free, but you can actually register it through our app registration page. AD has a whole bunch of client libraries. There's just 2 of them listed here, but that whole login flow, that whole dance to get the token, pop the consent screens up, you can actually do that in one line of code using their client libraries. Makes it really simple. Gotchas no longer apply. If you're signing in, before we had our own app registration page, the other option is you can actually sign in through the Azure Management Portal, and you can configure these apps. If you do that, there's a couple gotchas you still have to watch out for. The only reason now you would do that, maybe besides using the page we created on Power BI, is if you're going to maybe make an app that does something in Office and does something in Power BI, then you'd have to register it through the Azure portal, where you can take permissions for both applications. And then references for all these flows, everything I just said is up on dev.powerbi.com. So I showed you earlier, we made a really quick real-time dashboard by just using the API console. Let me just quickly talk about a real scenario, which is almost exactly 1 year old. How many people remember this? How-old.net? So this is a build demo we put together last year for Build. I was one of the people on the demo team. And the idea was, OK, we'll put out this website. It'll use some of the new machine learning APIs to recognize faces and age and gender of the people in the photos. I think they have a demo of this outside in the hallway now. So we'll put this up there, and some people will try it. We'll collect like the telemetry data about how many people tried it. We'll stream it in real time through Azure Stream Analytics, and we'll land it in a real-time Power BI dashboard. Most people remember the first part of that now. The idea here was we'll show the full end-to-end stack. So when we're prepping for the demo, we looked at the keynote for Build last year, and we said, OK, 10,000 people roughly maybe watched it live. So we figured maybe 3,000 people would give this a shot. So they go up on stage, they show the site, and we see this spike in usage, which we expected. As soon as they put the site up there and they said, OK, upload your photos, we expected to see a spike. And it went up. It was a little bit higher than we thought, and then it slowly started to go back down. But then 15 minutes later, it started going back up again. And it kind of kept going up. 48 hours later, this is the picture. So instead of 3,000 people trying it, 48 hours is 15 million. This down here is the original spike we saw. Actually, it's like right down there. It was a little different than we thought. The challenges were a little different. It became less of a streaming scenario and more of a big data scenario. Let's actually look at the dashboard now. Let me see if I loaded it. So this is the dashboard today. So numbers have gone up a lot more since then. And you can see some of these things are actually still moving in real time. This data is being pumped through Stream Analytics. But some of these things are showing historical data for all time. Like here is the total trend of this usage for all time. And that data got pretty big. So we had to use a couple techniques to scale this up. So we had this data pumping into an Azure Event Hub. And then we're picking it up with an Azure Stream Analytics job. And in that Stream Analytics job, we're actually forking the data. We're going to take a set of that data for the real-time tiles, and we're going to aggregate it down to only the data needed to be displayed in the real-time tiles. So we're going to take this large data and turn it into just much smaller data that's easier to stream across and see these updates happen about every 10 seconds here. And that will give us the current picture of what's going on. Now there's the historical data, which is a lot bigger. Well, in that same Stream Analytics job, we take a much larger aggregate of the data, barely an aggregate at all, and we dump that into an Azure Blob Store. So the job actually has two outputs. When it's dumped into Blob Store, once it's dumped into Blob Store, we use Azure Data Factory to actually pick up that raw data or semi-raw data and process it into the metrics we need for the other visuals on the dashboard. So I'm going to go back one more time. Like these line charts. And then we're dumping that into Azure SQL. And we're using Direct Query to connect to Azure SQL to show that data here. So we actually have big data and real-time data we can combine on one dashboard just because we let you combine multiple sources here. So we can use the best tools for the best job, in this case, Stream Analytics for the real-time pieces, Azure Data Factory, SQL Azure for the historical pieces, the big data pieces, and still see them all in one place. So with that, I'll hand it back to Wukaj. We'll talk about custom visuals.
Thanks, Josh. So yeah, let's talk a little bit of custom visuals. But first, that's pretty impressive, right? Those guys, I think that you built it in a week, right? And most of the work was just a few hours just setting it up. And then it's been running for the better part of a year at scale, right? And that's something that you can do with the REST APIs that Josh was showing, but also all the other capabilities that Power BI offers. So when we talk about integrate, that's like a classic example of how fast and reliable you can build a solution on top of Power BI. Now let's talk a little bit about custom visuals. So who's experienced a custom visual before? There we go. If you watch pretty much any of our sessions, you've seen them. The cool thing about custom visuals is that you can actually build them yourself, and building them is not hard. As Josh was mentioning, for developers, we've been trying to make it really, really easy to get started and get going. And we've taken that same approach with the extensibility pieces of our platform. What that means is that you can go out, even today, start writing code for a custom visual within just a couple of minutes. All the code that you see, or all the visuals that you see in Power BI itself, right? All of our line charts, scatter charts, tables, and such, all of that code is available under MIT license, which means it's been open sourced, on GitHub. I'll show you where to find it. It's an MIT license. What that means is you can use it for personal, but also for corporate and professional, and for corporate gain, right? So it's all available to you. Now you can use custom visuals throughout the entire Power BI experience, right? So you can use them in reports and dashboards. And your users are free to share custom visuals through a portable package format, which we call a .pbi viz file, that I can email to folks or I can download from a gallery. I'll show you what that all looks like. Okay? The thing that I like to say is we have a 3-step process for making custom visuals. There's the download, import, and wow. Right? So we try to make sure that it's just that fast and easy. We've built a community-driven gallery. We have almost 50 visualizations you can go to and download right now and get started. Who saw the awesome sand dance video thing? Yeah? Well, you can actually download it right now, and it's out at visuals.powerbi.com. We actually have an ask for everyone in the room. If you're tinkering with custom visuals, send those to the gallery. Share your code on GitHub, because part of this experience of working with Power BI is also about helping each other learn the best practices and build on the shoulders of giants, right? So we're open sourcing a lot of the code for all the visuals that we put in the gallery, and then we're asking anyone who submits to do so as well. So with that, let's hop over into the demo. Sorry, the demo. So if you go to visuals.powerbi.com, you'll be redirected here, which is our visuals gallery. And what you can see here is that we have all of these visualizations. Here's the sand dance visual that you could use. Here's the visual that we used for the community demo, plus a whole bunch of others that you can download. Everything, from waffle charts that allow you to actually have you can actually customize these dots using like SVG images. And so you can have little, cars and bicycles in these things. You can also have, custom SVG diagrams overlaid with data. You can have 3D world maps if you'd like. And one of my favorites is this one, which is even an aquarium of data. Okay, so all of that is available to you. And to go use one of these things, all you do is you just press the download button, you press I agree, and then you get this .pbi viz file. So if I have a report here, you may have seen this, report in previous examples. This, again, is a custom visual too, right? So you can go click around on that custom visual and have some fun with it. But to use a custom visual, all you do is you press this little ... over here. And you'll see that this report has a lot of random custom visuals in it, right? So if I go press ... I then go import, and then I can go select from my downloads folder any of the custom visuals that I have. So I could go select aquarium and bring it in. And then when I'm done with it, what I'll see is after aquarium imports, you'll see the little fish icon right here. And right from there, you can start using this visual just like any of the other visuals. If I save this report and I publish it to the Power BI service, I can use the custom visual there. This same capability of importing a custom visual is also available in the web service UI. Let me take questions at the end. And so you can actually very easily take that visual. So if you're like a consultant, for example, and you're working with lots of different organizations, you can actually invest in the stable of custom visuals that you use across multiple projects, right? If you're in IT and you have specific portals that need specific views of the data to help decision makers make something, you can invest in that once and then reuse it across all of the different things in your organization, right? And then if you're like an ISV and you're building solutions using Power BI, you can also do that, right? So it's actually a very flexible kind of system. For building custom visuals. Now, I'm not going to go through demoing that for the interest of time. What I am going to go through is I'm going to just show you the GitHub repo really quickly. So if you go out to GitHub and you go to Microsoft/Power BI-visuals, you'll see the repo that we have. And here you have everything you need to get started writing custom visuals. You have all of our source code. You have all of our unit tests. Unit tests are incredibly important. They allow you to move quickly without having to retest manually all the time. It also has all of our wikis for describing our visuals. We also place the code for all of the visuals that we ship to the gallery, like the ones that Microsoft ships, into the custom visuals folder. You'll find that if you navigate into SRC, then you go to clients, and then you see this custom visuals folder. You'll see code files under the visuals folder right here, where you'll start being able to see all of those things. Right? So you might recognize the astroplot, for example, is one of the visuals that Microsoft put into the gallery. We also have in this repo a playground. And so what we've tried to do is we've tried to make it really easy for you as a developer to test your custom visuals. And we've done that in 2 ways. Right? So the first one is that even when you use the playground, or when you use this repo, and you sync it locally, and you build it, you will get this web page hosted on your own box. And you can integrate your custom visuals into it. And what this allows you to do is very easily, locally, test your visual with whatever data that you want. Okay, so that's part one. Now, when you want to actually go and ship your visual to users, you have to jump into our web-based developer tools. So there's 2 ways that you can do it to get here. You can either just sort of add dev tools onto the end of the URL you sign into Power BI. So for most folks in the room, it's app.powerbi.com/devtools. Or under the gear icon, there's a dev tools. I won't show that in the interest of time. But when you get here, you have a full web-based development environment. So this is some code. Custom visuals are implemented using TypeScript. And what TypeScript is just typed JavaScript. So if you can write JavaScript, you can write TypeScript. Why did we choose TypeScript? It allows us to know what the types are so we can do things like unit tests, which we can't really do with JavaScript. And then from here, you can press the compile and run button, and then you'll see a preview of your visual here. I probably don't have time to go through all of the interfaces. There's not a lot of complexity. You just need to know that when you're writing a visual for Power BI, you're writing a generic reusable component. That's sometimes a little bit different from some people who've written like D3 code and put it on individual web pages with that, have sort of like you own that environment. In Power BI, when you write a visual, you can have multiple instances of the visual on the same page. You might have other visuals on that same page. So you do want to take care that you're isolating your code and you're respecting other things that might be on the page. We also have announced that we're going to add some sandboxing in the coming weeks to the service. And what that means is that your custom visuals will run inside an iframe. If your custom visuals today have an iframe in them, you will need to make your change to your code to detect that you're already running in an iframe, and then you can forego the iframe you've added, just because iframe in an iframe is a terrible thing. And the last thing is here that you have a CSS file, right? So the CSS file allows you to apply styling. Do scope your CSS attributes and class names, because that way they won't interact with other things that might be on the page. Okay, so that's the whistle-stop tour of building custom visuals in Power BI. Okay, so with that, let me hand it over to Josh. We'll talk a little bit about integration.
All right, so integration. This is getting Power BI into your application, whereas before we showed getting stuff into Power BI using the APIs. Oh, I love your slide. We have the Power BI service, and you have written an application like we showed before where we use our APIs to actually interact with Power BI, push data into Power BI, push content into Power BI. Well, you can also use our APIs to take stuff out of Power BI and put it into your own application. So my favorite example of this, and these guys unfortunately aren't at the summit, but I know they're watching online, is this app that DevScope created. It's called Power BI Tiles. And what they did was they gave you a way to put Power BI inside PowerPoint using our APIs. So if you actually go into, and they're distributing this through the Office store. So if you go into the Office store and search for Power BI Tiles, you'll find the app. I've already installed it, so I can go in here and just reuse it. I'll do Insert Power BI Tiles. And what that's going to do is going to load their app. And it's a little bit bigger. Just like all the apps I've been showing you so far, an app integrating with Power BI starts with a login to Power BI. So I can say login, and they will, even though they're a third party, they will invoke the same login flow. And since it logged in as me, it logged in with single sign-on, so I went through all those steps, but the same steps I showed in all the other apps. Now they called our List Dashboards API to list out all the dashboards that I have in my account. And they did the same for List Reports, so they can list out all the reports that I have in my account. So now what I can do is I can actually pick a dashboard, and they're going to use the List Tiles API now to list out all the tiles that are on the dashboard. And what they actually do is they take the first tile and embed it right here in PowerPoint, and then give you the option to kind of navigate through the rest of them. So now what I have is a Power BI visual directly in my application. I can create a couple more of these if I want. And these are live, connecting with the service. And now I have Power BI in this presentation. Now, they happen to write an app that was an Office add-in or an Office app that takes Power BI and puts it inside there, and they put that app inside PowerPoint. But you could do this with any application. One such application is Dynamics AX7, a product sold by Microsoft. And they have their own out-of-the-box visuals, their own charts, their own reports, but they also have their own analysts who their customers have their own analysts who actually want to go and build their own reports using Dynamics data, but they also want to be able to see it inside Dynamics. So what Dynamics did is they added this option to link your Dynamics account to your Power BI account. So when you come into Dynamics now, you actually see this option that says connect to Microsoft Power BI. When they click Get Started there, it does that same login flow that we've seen in every app. And then they call our List Dashboards and List Tiles API to populate their tile picker. User can go through, select the tiles they want, and actually see them side by side with the built-in visuals that came from AX. And then let you do things where you can resize these. Notice when I was in PowerPoint and I was resizing them, they were actually re-rendering for that size. They give you some options to do that here. Another thing they did is that everything you see on this page is contextual. And it's contextual to this box that's all the way up in the top right corner. And what that is, that's the account of the person of the customer that they're viewing in that particular session. And when they switch that account, everything on this page they want to update to reflect the new account they selected. Well, they want the same thing to be true for even the user-generated content that they embedded alongside their out-of-the-box content. So we actually have an option now that when you can pass in exactly one filter additionally into the tile when you actually go to render it. So when you add that filter in, we actually and it onto all the filters that are already on the tile. So in this case, they change the account. We add the account name equals whatever the account is, and those tiles will automatically update, just like the rest of the visuals on the page. They'll automatically update to reflect just that account. So it can really feel like it's part of your application. So there's two things you can embed right now, Power BI tiles and Power BI reports. The approach for both of them is pretty similar. And there's samples for them both up on dev.powerbi.com. And here's just a snippet from the sample. You use the APIs that I showed you before to find the tiles, find the reports from the user, and let them select the ones they want. And then what you're going to do is you're going to create an iframe inside your page. And when you actually went and did the calls to the REST APIs to get the information about the tiles and reports, you had to get that access token by generating that login flow. You'll use that same access token here to actually render the report. So you open up the iframe. Once you've gotten the access token, you'll open up the iframe. That's the only one you didn't highlight. And you open up the iframe, and basically, you'll set up the action for it. It's a load tile action. And in there, you'll pass in that access token that you got. You'll pass in the sizes you want to make, you want the visual to render as. And then you'll actually post that message up into the iframe as you load it. And that will do what you just saw in those two examples. So again, to integrate live content into your applications, we have the APIs for listing the dashboards, listing the tiles, listing the reports. Once you've done that, you'll see embed URLs on all those objects. You take that embed URL, and that's what you use to call that iframe, along with the access token and the additional information on the size that you pass in. More to come on that, too. And since it's hosted in an iframe, it'll work on your PC, it'll work on your phone, it'll work on your tablet seamlessly.
So great. So thanks, Josh. So I'm going to breeze through content packs. So who's built a content pack in the room? OK, great. Now, keep your hand up if you built an ISV content pack. We have Ed here from Tygraph. And PlanView, there we go. So PlanView. So we have two content pack authors, folks who have done this already. So the key thing about Power BI is that we're also trying to enable people who build SaaS services and have applications to integrate and allow all the Power BI users to experience the value that you already offer through content packs. A content pack is a report, a dashboard, and a data set that's curated to a specific role within your user base and exposed in Power BI. And so we have a process where you can contact us and work with us directly to shepherd your content through and actually deliver a content pack in the Power BI service. I like to think about it like this. Like if you have an existing web API where your users can connect to their account's data through your cloud service, you have an existing authentication mechanism for that, you can then take that API, wrap it in a content pack in about 12 weeks. It takes about 4 to 8 weeks to build the data model and the report, and then another 4 weeks or so to ship it out through Power BI. And it usually takes about 1 or 2 engineers on your side to go accomplish that. I like to think about it as the simplest, easiest, fastest way to add personalizable data experiences to your existing products. Right? And then you get to leverage all the benefit of the Power BI service and the Power BI desktop and the whole ecosystem around that to empower your users. And then as Josh was showing those integration scenarios where those users can then use that content. If you choose to use our REST APIs, you choose to use our embedding capabilities to leverage that content back into your own experiences. Okay? So it's a very straightforward system for going through it. The key thing that you need to do to go build a content pack is you do need to have some knowledge of your REST APIs. We'll show you how to build a connectivity piece that knows how to do the authentication step. And then you have to tune and tweak your data model. So that's just some technical work. If you're already invested in building Power BI content, it's nothing new. It's the same stuff, rinse, lather, repeat, and you can build content packs on scale. If you're an SI or if you're work on contract, you could actually go and build content packs for services yourself and submit them as well. So it's something to think about. We have an email address, pbi_apps@microsoft.com. You can email us if you're interested in building a content pack, and we can kick off the process. So with that, I just want to leave you with a number of links. Josh has been talking a lot about dev.powerbi.com. Go check it out. Everything we talked about here is linked from there. We have a developer blog, is a channel off the main Power BI blog. So if you scroll about halfway down on the Power BI blog, which is www.powerbi.com/blog, there's a developers bucket. You press on that, you'll hear from us. Samples are out on GitHub in the Microsoft account. Open source visuals are out on the GitHub repo. You'll have the visuals gallery, and you can ask us questions on Stack Overflow or through the Power BI community. I've been asked to ask everyone to fill out evaluations. So you want to go to the community and fill out evaluations. Anyone who's got sunglasses, put them on now, and then we can answer any questions that you have. Thanks so much for coming, and hopefully you found this interesting. So the question is, is there a plan to allow consumption of content packs in Power BI Desktop? And the answer is we're looking at it. So for sure, we're bringing all of the raw data connectivity for content packs into Desktop, and you can see those connectors in the Get Data experience right now inside Desktop. But so we're looking at how to go bring that. Mm-hmm.
Incremental updates. At the moment, we don't have that. Mainly the way our engine works is we process in data and we index it, so it's really fast for querying, but not necessarily the fastest for those type of OLTP updates. The recommendation, if you want to do something like that, is actually create a direct query model on top of your data, on top of something like SQL that can handle those types of updates.
Yeah, so the question is, what's the data connectivity story for CRM online? So right now, it is OData feeds, and the CRM team is looking at their future roadmap.
So, like AX scenario which you showed that applies to CRM.
That AX scenario applies to AX. So the CRM team is looking at their.
It's not going to work right now.
They're not right now. Yeah, but CRM is looking at how they're going to integrate with Power BI. Okay. Let's take something from this side of the room.
Is there a plan to do something similar to context, but for on-premise data sources? For example, I have lots of clients with the system, but the system is on-premise. I want to create a PBIX, publish it, change the connection string programmatically, but most important, have something next to install the personal data. Have an experience that it's important.
Yeah, so like I mentioned, it is a goal of ours to provide that level of automation on top of more things. So we started out with gateways that are just in the cloud. We are looking at how we're going to extend that into gateways that are on-prem as well, including the enterprise gateway.
Really good.
Thanks, Dan.
Key things I think you see, one is how to configure a report. So I'm trying to be visual. I want to put things in the article, so to speak. The other thing is I didn't see relationships on schema.
Yeah, currently relationships are not supported. It's for single tables. The idea is that we were going to optimize the performance of the data coming in first, and then we're going to extend it, the ability to do more complex schemas.
What about the configuring
Programmatically? Not currently supported yet. The closest we have at the moment is to basically create a template PBIX file and upload it and just change the data that it's pointing to.
Are we getting okay, so we're going to be at the back of the room or just outside because they need to convert this whole thing for Nate's talk. Okay, so thanks very much, everyone.
Thanks.